Divorce lawyers of Reddit, what is the most insane, evil, funny, dumb, way a spouse has tried to screw the other? My friend's dad Alan is a lawyer and does mostly divorces and custody cases. The state where he practices had a lot of mediated divorces. I guess they're faster and cheaper than the traditional route. He had a couple come that had already figured out division of property, custody, support, etc. Alan figures it'll be a quick afternoon and he'll be home in time for dinner. He's reviewing everything with them and gets to the question of which parent should be called first if the child gets hurt or sick at school or camp. Well, for some reason this turned into a huge issue. Each parent wanted to be the one who was called first. The couple argued for an hour, for which Alan was being paid hundreds of dollars. After an hour, Alan suggested that they split, take a break, collect themselves and start discussions anew on another day or maybe talk about it on their own and come see Alan when they figured it out. Nope, the couple insisted on ironing it out right then and there. They fought for 6 hours while Alan just sat there and listened. They refused his help, they refused to come to an agreement. By this time it was almost 8 p.m. and Alan said, "I don't care what you two do, but I'm going home to my wife right now." For some reason, that seemed to make something click for them and they did eventually resolve it. Not sure why it took 6 hours and a couple of $1,000 to do it, but they did. Guess everyone has a hill to die on. Friend was going through divorce from insane husband. He had been texting her pics of the gun he bought and threatening her. Police were called. Nothing they could do because it was only a picture. He was staying with a secret girlfriend at this point. She allowed him to go get his stuff from the house. She was scared to go back in the house alone. I went with her. First red flag was he had changed the locks. So we waited for locksmith to open the house and change the locks again. Well, when the door opens, we noticed all of the furniture was gone. So we carefully went upstairs in search of her cats. The entire second floor was empty. No cats. No furniture. Even her clothes were gone. Come to find out he hired a moving company to pack and take everything, even the food in the fridge. Finally found the cats. He had taken them to another vet in town and put them up for boarding under his sister's name thinking she would not be able to find them. He was finally forced to disclose what happened to her possessions. He had them taken to a storage unit far away from the home. I don't practice divorce law, but I did an internship with a family law judge in law school that involved me sitting in on a lot of stuff. One divorced couple came in because the ex-husband wanted to lower his spousal support payments, due to his lowered income, great financial responsibilities, and the fact that his ex-wife was declining to seek paid employment, all of which sounds reasonable on the face. It turned out that while his income had been lowered due to cuts, his new wife, who technically worked as his assistant, and had done so prior to the divorce, was now making quadruple her salary, more than he ever had. He claimed that his ex-wife had unpaid renters living with her and could have money to survive if she charged them rent. It turned out they were the couple's shared 18-year-old twins who were living at home having just graduating high school and were going to keep living at home while starting college in the fall. It also later turned out that he allowed his stepdaughter and her 2 children to live with him and his wife rent-free and paid for her college. His ex-wife produced evidence that he told his own kids to figure out paying for college themselves. He claimed that his ex-wife worked as a nanny for free by choice and should be getting paid for work elsewhere. The kids she watched for free were their 3 joint grandchildren from their eldest child, 2 of which were severely disabled. Dr. My client's spouse accused him of giving his deceased wife cancer. I represented a guy who was on his second marriage. His first wife passed away from cancer. He and his kids were obviously devastated. My client was a pretty sensitive guy with a big heart. His second wife could be very charming, which was why he fell for her, but it was all a facade. Anyway, to make a long story about a lengthy divorce short, my client met a very kind and affectionate woman during his case. They really hit it off and were basically engaged, even though his divorce was far from over. The fiancé started having health problems and was diagnosed with a form of terminal cancer. Somehow the second wife found out about this and tried to use the cancer diagnosis against my client in court. She developed this crazy theory that my client had killed his first wife by giving her cancer and that he was doing the same thing to his fiancée. The second wife's attorney, who was quite good, refused to be a party to it. The attorney never addressed the argument in court and didn't even ask the second wife any questions about it during testimony. Rather, the attorney informed the judge that the second wife wished to address the court directly about an issue. The judge allowed her to do so, in a highly irregular move. The second wife told her crazy conspiracy theory to the judge, adding that she was certain my client had tried to give her cancer at some point as well. Not my story, but one I read here a couple of years ago. I really hope I don't butcher it, as it's been a while, but here goes. There was a super wealthy guy that was a top exec at a Fortune 500 company who was getting a divorce, and it was rather nasty. This guy was pretty much set for life. He had a bunch of stock, houses, and assets in so many places. The ex-wife wanted everything she could possibly get. The husband came up with an idea that if she let him keep everything, he would give her half of his paycheck for the rest of his life. She quickly agreed because his checks were huge, and this also included any bonuses, which were in the millions. As soon as the paperwork was finalized, he quit his job and started to work part-time at a sporting goods store. I can't remember which one. This story was told by another employee there, not the actual guy that got divorced. Anyway, he still had all of his assets, so he would drive to work in a super expensive car, and one day the employee asked how he could possibly afford that car. The guy said he was set for life and didn't even need to work at all, but every Friday when he got his paycheck, it made everything so worth it, knowing his ex-wife would only be getting about $150 per check. I work for a divorce attorney now, but the craziest thing came to my attention when I worked for the prosecuting attorney. This couple was breaking up and Mr. left the house. Mrs. went to work the next morning as usual. When she returned home in the evening, she found Mr. had been to the house and removed his clothing and belongings as she expected. What she didn't expect was that he had also gorilla glued her belongings together. He glued the TV remote to the table, the phone to its cradle, the couch pillows to the couch, and even glued the vacuum cleaner to the carpet. She called the police and reported this as property damage. The police went with her through the house, documenting dozens of items glued to various things, but for days she was discovering random things and she would call to amend or update her report. My GD oven mitts were glued to the wall. Or he glued the effing sheets together in the linen closet. I've seen people do and say really awful things to each other, but that was diabolical. How about a wholesome, insane one? Yanal, but this was told to me by my mom regarding the divorce she got from my dad. They couldn't settle on an alimony amount. Mom and her lawyer came in with a number, Dad countered with a number. They couldn't agree. Because my dad thought my mom should get twice the amount in alimony she was asking for, and my mom didn't want my dad to give her that much money for month. It took months for them to settle on a figure that appeased both of them. Even then, my mom puts aside the extra above what she wanted in case my dad ever has a financial emergency, and my dad puts aside the extra she didn't want in case my mom ever has a financial emergency. The funny thing is, they don't know the other is putting the money aside for the other. My mom told me about her emergency stash and my dad told my brother about his emergency stash. Bro and I discussed it while talking about what nut jobs our parents are. I've gotten a lot of support for this response, thank you. I'm not going to say that their divorce was perfect, it wasn't. There were still some hurt feelings and resentment from all parties involved. However, my parents, for all their flaws, both accepted their own responsibilities for the falling apart. I think it helps that they still loved each other deeply, they just weren't in love anymore. They have been friends since my mom was 2 and my dad was 3, started dating when mom was 12 and dad was 13. They separated at the ages of 49 and 50. It makes sense that they grew apart. Have a friend who went through a nasty divorce and his ex was vengeful as hell, despite him having done nothing wrong like cheating, lying, etc. Basically, he got laid off from good job and the loss of status embarrassed her, especially as he took to being stay-at-home dad and their kids adored him. Never mind she had MBA and six-figure job herself. She would buy expensive shit on credit cards to show high expenses, then return it for cash or store credit so that the refund didn't go back on card, so that she could try to get more support. To just get a job, he took one at Home Depot. He'd been an engineer at a tech company. Later on, he landed an IT consulting position that was part-time but paid about what he made at HD working full-time. She petitioned the courts to try and force him to have a full-time job, basically wanting to force him to spend 30 more hours to earn same. Part of his custody granted him dinner one night/week with the kids, i.e. 5 to 7 p.m. He asked for it to be school pickup to 7 p.m. instead, and she refused that even though from 3 to 5 they were at home with a nanny who had to be paid for that time while mom was at work. Edited for spelling, as I was shaking while typing this out earlier today. My dad was physically and verbally abusive to my mom and my siblings. He never sexually abused us, but he was serially unfaithful to my mom and had a nasty drug habit. He left rehab so many times, I don't know why she stuck with him that long. When I was in 7th grade, he tried to kill my mom, and she finally files for divorce. And none of his outrageous claims are believed. But I was a knucklehead like my dad. Nobody could tell me right from wrong. I was just following the example I had, and it wasn't good. Mom told me to straighten up or go live with dad, and like a fool, I chose poorly. It was a year of pure hell. His philosophy was the beatings will continue until morale improves, and he took it literally. He also remarried another drug addict right away, I suspect to make my mom jealous, but it backfired. During that year, he beat me, his wife, and even put my stepbrother's face through a glass coffee table when he tried to defend her from him. I decide I want to go back to live with mom and it outraged my dad. He went off the rails for a bit. So he asks me one morning how I felt, and I told him to his face I wanted to live with mom because he was an abusive a-hole. Bad idea, as I got beat, bad. Mom calls me that night and asks why we weren't at the courthouse. Turns out he skipped the court date and said he couldn't take off work because he wanted to keep custody to make my mom miserable. This happened 2 or 3 more times. Finally I wisened up, and the next time he asked me I told him I changed my mind and wanted to stay with him, so he says hop in the car. We get to the courthouse. My mom lived 2 hours away from his place because he moved right after he got engaged. So inside the courtroom the judge asks me which parent I want to live with and I say my mom. He asked why I was changing my mind from a year ago and I detailed all the abuse from the last year, including intentionally skipping court dates after asking me how I was going to answer. Judge glares at my dad, and dismissed me from the courtroom, and I have to sit in the hallway on the bench alone. 10 minutes later my dad stomps out, grabs me by the arm and drags me to the car saying the judge called me a liar and ruled in favor of my dad. But he lied and actually kidnapped me and beat my ass 2 hours back to his place. Oddly it wasn't ruled a kidnapping because the judge didn't sign the ruling yet or else my mom never pressed charges on him, but he never went to jail. She came the next Friday night with a deputy to pick me up. His new wife, I refused to call her my stepmom, caught me packing a few belongings and told him and he left work to try to beat me again and stop me before she could get into town, but I climbed out my bedroom window onto the roof and told him I would jump off and run away to the police station if he tried to stop me. Just as he was yelling at me, the deputy arrived and my mom was pulling up behind him, so crisis averted. Not an attorney heard this one from a friend of mine. He was put in the middle of his parents' divorce. His mom is a teacher in Ontario, Canada, and she gets paid very well, $120K per year. His dad is just a general laborer and made about $55K per year. When they got divorced, he gave her the house free and clear with the understanding that when she retires he will get 55% of her pension to offset his interest in the house. She agrees. Of course, she has to retire for him to get his money. Fast forward a few years and his mom retires but never tells his dad. The son finds out and told his mom, "Hey, you are retired, you have to start giving dad his money." She tells the son, "Don't tell your dad, please." Fast forward a few more years, he finds out his dad is in financial difficulty because of the downturn in the economy. He backhanded tells his dad that his mom has been retired for a few years now. So he contacts his attorney. Now she is screwed. She pissed off the family, divorce, court because she agreed to this and is now trying to screw him over. In the end, he gets 65% of her pension for the rest of their lives and she has to pay him all the money that she owes him. Child of traumatic divorce here. There's so many, and I mean so many things I could post on this thread about how fucking terrible my parents were to each other, but this takes the cake. My parents were separated, in the process of divorcing, and had split custody between my brother and I. We were 5 and 7 at the time. My dad didn't have his own place yet, so when it was his turn to be with us he came back to our house, the one he purchased mind you, and my mom was supposed to leave. One weekend they were arguing over something and it got so bad that my mom wouldn't leave and told my dad she would call the police, something she apparently did a lot to get her way, which after growing up with her I can attest she did this a lot unnecessarily to control us. So she left, called the police, told them my father was dangerous and had a gun, my dad was in the army and we had plenty guns, locked in a safe of course. Of course the police were just doing their job, and took my mom at face value. It went so fast from my brother and I watching TV with my dad to the police knocking at our door, my dad opening the door and getting pepper sprayed without the cops saying anything, and then my dad locked the door and the cops couldn't bust it down, so they came around back and broke our sliding glass door in so they could arrest my dad in our front yard with all our neighbors watching. I didn't really understand what was happening at the time, but it was traumatizing for sure. Then my mom tried to get full custody of us in their actual divorce, and thank God the judge ruled for split custody. My whole childhood was shitty, honestly. BC all they did was explain very deep and emotionally complex situations to very young children who just wanted their parents to love each other. But yeah, I've never quite forgiven my mom for that one. Not a lawyer but child of divorced parents. Mom got custody of me and my brother. She told my dad she would make us hate him. Went from a big house to a 3-bedroom apartment and grew up poor. Only saw my dad 3 times a year and talked to him on the phone once a week for an hour. Turns out that's what she asked for in court, but she lied and said our dad didn't want to see or talk to us. He paid her child support and alimony every month and she worked full-time. We grew up with no Wi-Fi or cable, no sports or after-school activities, and I never went to a summer camp. Apparently we also didn't have insurance for like 2 years when I was 12. Turns out she was pocketing all the money and keeping it in her savings. Apparently around the divorce hearing when I didn't have insurance she had $12K in savings, but the judge didn't see that as a red flag. We did hate our dad until we got older and realized he was trying to give us stuff the whole time and offering to send us to summer camp, but she refused. Even after her hoarding all that money and us not growing up with our dad, he still paid for my college and books and bought me a car when mine broke down. I ended up stopping a relationship with my mom when I found out she called me a whore in order to defend my brother's behavior. She didn't bother to reach out even though she's the parent. Later I contacted her on and off trying to fix the relationship. She never bought a book for uni and also refused to let me use her tax info to get a better loan for school when I had to my last year of university. In the end, her bitterness fucked her over because she no longer has a daughter and she has a son who yells at her and uses her for free rent.